Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Glad to be back today. Glad to be back. It's a beautiful weekend so far, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about dysfunction. We're going to talk about dysfunction. We're going to have a little fun with it, too. We're going to have a little fun with the show today because we're going to be talking about pointing out dysfunction, and we're going to be talking about what happens when we're overlooking dysfunction. And I know that many of us have a tendency of doing that. I even have a tendency of overlooking dysfunction with people that are next to me, near me. Why do we do it? Why does that happen? Why do we overlook some of the things? Why do things happen out of the blue? And I know that many of you that are listening right now, whether you're listening on USA Radio networks around the country, on AM radio, or you are listening or watching on social media, one way or another, many of us have had a situation where something happened out of the blue and we felt like we had no idea that this was going to happen. And in reality, other people were like, what are you talking about? We saw the train wreck happening, years ago. Where were you at? Okay. And I think we've all been there before, whether it's a close friend of ours that we didn't see something coming, or a couple that we are very close to that we didn't realize the dysfunction and all of a sudden they're getting a divorce randomly, or our family, perhaps maybe your mother or father when you were growing up, or as an older adult or younger adult, they decide to get divorced and you're like, this happened out of the blue. Where did this happen? Or whatever happens, we have a tendency of not seeing the dysfunction. We're overlooking it. And I find it interesting because I feel that we do this a lot. I think that we do this in our own life. I think that we do this in other people's lives. I think that we especially do it with friends and people that are near to us because we're not analyzing their every move. And we really just don't want to, right? Because we want to have a normal life where we get along and we connect and we can have conversation. But in the same half, it's like, why did this happen? And how do we overlook this? How do we begin to overlook this? And when did this become something that we do? Okay, so this show is dedicated to Jeff, by the way. Jeff, I'm dedicating this show to you for obvious reasons. And it was interesting because I recently put a video out. It's coming out. It might be out already on the members page on the membership site on the YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, just put Ashley Burgess in. Just go to YouTube and just search up Ashley Burgess and you'll find it. And you can actually join there as well. It's got a private membership option as well, where I put some content at. And one of the pieces of content that we created recently is titled "The Poop in the Pool." And it's interesting because the concept of the poop in the pool, and this is dedicated to Jeff, is he was telling me years and years ago that long time ago in his life, a situation took place where they were all swimming around, his entire family, and everybody's hanging out, and it's a summer break, and everybody's in the pool and having a good time. And his cousin points out the fact that somebody had pooped in the pool. And it wasn't his cousin that did it. He was just pointing out the fact that it was there. Just pointing it out. And I've talked about this on a couple other shows before because I just think this is so interesting. And, he's hanging out, and next thing you know, the aunt grabs him out of the pool and just starts spanking him. And it wasn't him that did it. It was just him that pointed out the dysfunction. And I know that I've talked about pointing out dysfunction, but I haven't talked about how this began and why it started. Okay, because that's what we need to know is why do we do this? Because sometimes we sit there and say, why was I so stupid that I didn't see this coming? Or where was I at? Sometimes I'll work with clients and they'll say, I had no idea that my spouse was going to ask me for a divorce. I never saw it coming. Or I never saw my parents going to get divorced. Or I never saw this happening. Or I never thought so-and-so was going to go to rehab. And the list goes on. But I've realized that beginning at a young age is when this overlooking of the dysfunction began. Okay. And why this started is when we're young kids and we're in a family dynamic and we're not able to make big decisions and we're not able to make choices for our own life and we're not able to move into our own apartment or drive ourselves when we're young, we actually have to deal with the fact that we have to be okay with what's happening in the family dynamic. We have to be okay with it. It's not like we can run away and get our own place. We just have to kind of acquiesce, right? It's one of my favorite words because I don't like the meaning of it, but I like the way it sounds. But anyway, point being is that we had to acquiesce to whatever was happening pretty much in the family dynamic. So if there was a lot of dysfunction, we just had to deal with it. And at 5 years old, 6 years old, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, pointing out the dysfunction doesn't really help us with anything, right? I don't know about you, but if you've ever pointed out the dysfunction when you were a kid, it probably didn't fall on happy ears. People probably didn't go, wow, it's so great. Thanks for pointing out that dysfunction here. We can all be a better family for it. Now, some of you might have been in a family dynamic where you were able to comment on the situation and that people would actually listen to you. And there was an open dialogue. And people were up to the fact of, well, maybe I do need to make some changes and maybe it would behoove me if I did X, Y, Z. But I think most of us did not grow up in that family dynamic. If you did, kudos to you. However, if you didn't, you know what I'm saying is that if there was dysfunction, let's say that there was dysfunction between your mother or father, or dysfunction with maybe somebody was an alcoholic or using drugs, or there was some issues with a sister or brother or stepsister or brother, you know, it was very hard to bring that up because nobody wanted to hear that, right? Nobody wanted to hear that there was a problem in the family. Nobody wanted to talk about what we call the dirty laundry, right? And I always find that interesting because the dirty laundry is so interesting that and I find that almost, I don't think it's a situational, and I don't think it's a timeline thing. You know, some people say, they go back and they say, oh, this was something that happened back in the baby boomers generation, or this happened in this generation, or this happened during World War II. I really think that there's certain people that just don't want to talk about any dysfunction. And I think that there's some people out there that they believe that dysfunction, if it's talked about, makes them look bad. I feel also there's some folks that we feel like we almost have like this mandate to point out the dysfunction. I've worked with clients recently that they say, I don't understand. I've pointed out the dysfunction, but the next thing you know, I'm not being spoken to. My best friend won't call me on the phone. I was just trying to protect them. What happened? I was just pointing out the fact that I believe that this was not real or something was wrong. And when I pointed that out, the next thing you know, I'm being blocked. And so we got to figure out who can we point out the dysfunction with? Who's ready for that type of truth, and then who's not? You know, and the funny thing about it is that I find that, you know, when we're growing up in the dynamic, it teaches us as a young child whether we're able to vocalize our opinions and our feelings, or if we need to hold it all in. Okay? Am I allowed to talk about how I feel? Am I allowed to have emotion? Am I allowed to point out what I see or I feel? Or do I feel like I can't? And if I have, and I've been shut down, I just don't do it any longer. You know, I find it remarkable how people can live as adults in a family dynamic where there's massive levels of dysfunction all around, but they're able to kind of maneuver the landmines on a daily basis, right? And the interesting part about it is they don't realize they're maneuvering these landmines every day. They just don't know why they just have such little energy. I don't know why I feel so bad. I don't know why I feel beaten down. I don't know why I feel so tired all the time. You know, it's interesting when I work with clients who are dealing with, you know, a lot of stress and anxiety coming because of the spouse, and they're walking on eggshells because they don't know what to say to that person. And every time they say something to that person, it's taken wrong. And then it's turned around, and then there's a fight or an argument, and they just try to avoid it. It's like, I just want to avoid conflict at all costs. I just don't want to deal with it. I'm going to put my head in the sand. And that's what most of us do, right? We just don't want to deal with it. It's like, why do we want to deal with it? It's like, if I just don't say anything, it'll go away. If I just don't bring it up, if I don't bring up the elephant in the room, it might go away. You know, some people ask, you know, when folks have been married for a long period of time, 20, 30 years in a dysfunctional marriage, how could you be married that long? Well, I think it becomes easy. I think it becomes like a strategy of how to self-survive. You know, it's almost like, okay, I'm gonna try to strategize how I can stay alive through these landmines, keep it together, and then we have the outside persona of how everything is going great. And I think nowadays with social media, it's so easy to keep up this persona, right? The social media, the Instagrams of the world, where we see folks where it looks like they're the best mother or the best father, like they're taking their kid on everything. Is that the truth? Or it's the best family. Everybody's so happy and they're all wearing their whites on the beach where they jump up and they do that kind of stupid jump where everybody's jumping in midair. I mean, come on. If I see that again, I don't know. Anyway, I mean, God bless. I understand it's something that photographers like to do. But, okay, so you see all these types of things. Everybody dressed the same or everybody in their Christmas flannel, and you're like, oh, how cute. But you're like, is this real? Or is this the image that's being shown to me to cover up the dysfunction? What about folks that have joint Facebook pages? Okay. Think about that. And I mean, maybe there's a few of you out there that you have a joint Facebook page because the other person just doesn't participate. And that makes sense. But some folks, not true. Some folks, something went down and somebody doesn't trust the other person on the Facebook, right? So now they have access to, they can see the comments, they can see the messenger, who's messaging who. Sometimes you think, oh, this must be the perfect marriage. They had the perfect marriage. And then, no. And then it's like you think they have the perfect marriage and they share these Facebook pages. No, it's because they don't trust each other. It's because there's absolute trust issues there. And I think more and more we have a tendency of defining ourselves based on what we see on social media from other people, right? And we think that they have the perfect marriage, but they just don't. Or we think they have the perfect family and they just don't. And it's interesting because it's hard to see the truth and how, and also it's hard to look at reality. And I think a lot of times when someone tells us something, it's really challenging. And I had something happen the other day that I thought was remarkable. And this is what I think is so interesting. And it's happening all the time now on media, all over the world. It was funny. I got a message from a friend of mine. And they showed a picture of a pan with 3 little steaks in there, like fillets or whatever, right? And it said, I'm not eating red meat tonight at all. Okay, that was the text. And it said, I've decided to listen to you. Okay. And it made me confused because I kept looking at the picture and I swear it looked like red meat in there. I swear. And I kept looking at it and looking at it and looking. And I kept telling myself over time, it must be salmon. I convinced myself that 3 pieces of meat look like possible salmon. And I convinced myself that therefore they weren't eating red meat because of the words that they texted me saying they were not eating red meat. That's not true. They were eating red meat. Those were fillets of meat that were in that picture. But I tried to tell myself that based on what was told to me in the written word. And I think nowadays more than ever, we are told how somebody feels. We are told how we are supposed to think. We are told that somebody has a healthy marriage. We are told that this person is XYZ. But it's like at some point in time, we've got to go back to the actions to make some of these decisions in our life. And I know when we were kids, what do? We had a tendency of overlooking the actions because we knew darn well what was going on, but there was nothing we could do to change it. So later on in today's show, I'm going to be talking about how we deal with the dysfunction. How do we express it? Are we allowed to bring it up? Are there certain people that we can bring it up with and certain people we can't? Obviously, that's true. And then what happens when we can't? What happens when we're stuck in a situation that we cannot bring up the dysfunction? What do we do then? Okay, and I'm going to give us some guidance on this because I know that many of you are dealing with this. You got somebody in your life you really care about, but the dysfunction is just way too much. And it's time to try to figure out how to safeguard yourself. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time. In 2 shakes.
I hope you've enjoyed my history and lore tales here on Ashley's True Life Show. I know that there...
Hey guys, so glad that everybody tuned in. We have a few minutes before we go back to the live satellite broadcast. And if you're just tuning in, you're catching on the whole concept of the dysfunction. And many of us have lived in family dynamics with extreme dysfunction, and we know what that's like. And so when we live in that dynamic, we overlook it. We try to overlook it for our own sanity. Some of us avoid it. Some of us would go over to friends' houses, right, and hang out with them and avoid as much as we had to with the family dynamic, constantly staying over to a friend's house, eating over there, hoping that they would adopt you, right? And then others of us, we just dealt with the dysfunction. We just kept dealing with the dysfunction, but just nobody talked about it. It was not something that was talked about. And I find that there's a lot of people that you can talk about the dysfunction, and then there's a lot of people that you can't talk about the dysfunction. And so we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to go through some of that today. And that's going to be a fun topic, I think, for many of us. And it'll be good. So I'm glad that everybody's tuned in. Let me go on and go down and see who we got here in the chat. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Brenda, great to see you. Red flags are not there for decoration. I love that. That's true. I mean, that's not, you definitely don't put that up on your, it's not like Christmas or Valentine's decorations for sure. We got it. And many of us, we don't want to see it. They're flying high. They're huge. They're like big American flag size that you see at a car dealership. But we're not looking at it. We don't want to see it. You're like, I don't see anything. I don't see anything at all. Renee, great to have you. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, Renee. We're glad to have you here. Obviously on the live broadcast, and the live Facebook here, social media, YouTube. We got a lot today. Dr. Marnie, great to see you. Dr. Marnie asked a great topic, dysfunction. It's so easy to ignore the red flags and believes others have the same values of honesty and goodness. So true. And we got to be aware of that. It's powerful, right? We got to be aware of the concept that, we got to be aware of it. We got to know where we stand. We got to be smart. Okay. And some of it we're okay with. We can distance ourselves. And some of it we need to point out. Because some of it is overstepping our boundaries. And we lose ourselves in that situation. Right. Because when we allow someone to overstep our values, we end up losing ourselves in that situation. And that becomes a big deal. Right. I mean, that's what it is. Gloria, great to have you. I was intimidated and embarrassed by the mistreatment and abuse growing up. And I get that. And that's the key is that, and Gloria, I appreciate you reaching out because many of us went through that, right? The mistreatment, the abuse growing up, the concept that we felt like we were not in charge of our own life. And we kind of tried to go in a fantasy world. Like some of us had to go into a fantasy world, right? Some of us had to create this different reality so that we didn't see the truth because it was so depressing or so overwhelming that we couldn't process it. Brian Collins, great to see you. How are you doing? Hey, thank you. Hey, I appreciate that. I lightened it up a little bit, so I'm kind of happy about it. Thank you for seeing it. And we're going to go back to the broadcast, and then we'll continue as I will be reading off more of y'all's comments when I come right back. Here we go. Let's turn on this.
.com and fill out a contact request, and we'll get right back to you.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about overlooking dysfunction. Why we overlook dysfunction? Well, we overlooked dysfunction growing up because we couldn't do anything about it. Many of us were in a family dynamic where there was a lot of dysfunction, and bringing it up just wasn't the thing to do. And maybe we did bring it up, but then there was a problem. We brought it up, and then all of a sudden, it wasn't the dysfunction anymore that was the issue. It was the fact that we brought it up. How dare us bring up the dysfunction? How dare us talk about things that are not perfect in this family? Right? And I find that this continues all the way through our adult life, all the way to the end of our life, for that matter. Most people, we don't point out dysfunction at all because we're in fear. And then many of us deal with the dysfunction, even though we don't like it. And then many of us resent the dysfunction. And then many of us feel like we're losing the best years of our lives because we're in the middle and inundated in dysfunction. Okay? And there's two different groups of people. You have the group of people that you can point out the dysfunction and the group of people that you can't. Okay? So how do we figure out who we can point it out to and who we can't. Who can we point out the dysfunction to? Who can we have, even, we don't even have to point out the dysfunction immediately. Who can we have a real down-to-earth conversation with? Who can we actually have a down-to-earth, real conversation with that won't get heated and people won't be screaming and yelling at one another? And that's a big question. Because what I've found is that a lot of times, because of our desire to deflect and our desire to project and our desire to deny and our desire to run away, I'm running out of this deal. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to hear how I'm screwing up. Or, you know what? This is all you. You're bringing up this dysfunction. Well, this dysfunction is because of you. Or you're the reason why I'm dysfunctional. Okay, and then the old victim reality, right? Where people sit there and say, no, yeah, I see it, but you're the reason why this whole family is, it has problems because of you. Because you're the one, You're the narcissist. You're the this, you're the that. So it's like, we have to find out, are people ready to even accept the fact of the truth? And first of all, we have to get right and make sure that we are actually processing this as the truth. And that's one of the biggest things, is that we got to step back and look at our own triggers. What's triggering us with this dysfunction? Why is this dysfunction so triggering to us? Honestly, you got to look at it. The triggers are important because the triggers actually help us to acknowledge where we are in our growth, right? The less triggers, the better off we are because we've worked through them. If we got a ton of triggers, and we're constantly angry, and we're constantly a short fuse, probably not a good thing. That means that we have a lot of anger issues, and we need to figure out where those anger issues came from, okay? And I'm not saying that anger is a horrible thing. I'm just saying anger seems to be our go-to, right? Anger is like the one emotion that's supposed to process them all, even though anger really has a challenging process, because anger really doesn't work, because we really never examine exactly, because really anger is usually sadness or resentment, or overwhelmed, or underwhelmed, or we feel defenseless, right? So it's like, what's triggering us? So first off, why are we being triggered on the dysfunction? Why does the dysfunction upset us so much? Okay, first off, that's a big one. And that takes a little bit of time and effort to figure out. But once we figure out that and we say, okay, I get it. I understand why this dysfunction triggers me. Maybe it reminds you of childhood. Maybe it reminds you also of the fact that it's triggering because you haven't been able to say anything about it. Maybe this reminds you of growing up, about how you had to keep quiet and couldn't say anything, right? And then it's like, okay, I can't keep doing this because I did this before and I don't want those same results. I want different results. So when we return, I'm going to be talking more about this. I'm going to be talking about the people we can, the people we can't point out, and what we do with those people that we cannot point out the dysfunction, how we deal with them in our life, and what we do with that. Because, we got to figure out, we got different tiers of people in our life. We got to figure out how to make it work. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
I hope you've enjoyed my history and lore tales here on Ashley's True Life Show.
Okay, we're back. Thank you all for tuning in. Let's see. Let me go back over to the chat section here. Okay, awesome. Cynthia. Thank you for tuning in, Cynthia. Oh boy, that happened to me. Yes. The worst thing is when you point out the dysfunction, right? That's the worst thing. And then you get your butt kicked, right? All of a sudden it's you. You're the problem. You're the issue, right? It's not about the dysfunction. We're going to make it about you now so we don't ever have to deal with our issues, right? And many of us have seen ourselves there, right? Ruth, failure to grasp the consequences of a poor function. Very true. Very true. Eiffel Tower. Hello, Ashley. Hello. Glad to have you. Glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Gloria, we were not seen or heard. We grew up not knowing who I was or what I felt, mostly numb. And that's what a lot of people did, right? That's what happened, is that you were not able to express your emotions or feelings. When you tried to express your emotions or feelings, you were probably told to be quiet, or that you were not smart, or that you just need to shut up, or this is an adult thing, or you don't know what you're talking about. And so when that happens, what do? Well, we eventually shut down. I mean, there's only so much that you can deal with. There's only so much that you can deal with being told to be quiet and still keep opening that voice and still keep saying how you feel. Most of the time we sit there and go, oh gosh, well, you know what? Obviously what I have to say doesn't matter here. Why do I keep on? Arnold, great to see you. People are really good at making it difficult to talk to them about it. It keeps us all stuck in the same patterns. And Arnold, that's so smart and so right on, because people are really good at making it difficult because they want to avoid it. They want to avoid it. And I found that if we continue to allow people to avoid it in these situations, that's okay. But how do we process that? How do we move on? How do we move on? Eiffel Tower, my mouth was practically sewn. No narcissistic mother. It was constant. I'm alive, surviving, understand better now, thanks to people like Ashley on the internet. God bless. God bless you too. And yes, when you're dealing with somebody with cluster B, especially a family member, mom or dad, real hard because it was constantly changing, right? The goalpost was constantly moving, right? The affirmations were randomly given. The anger was given ultimately when you didn't even know. I mean, think about it. When you're dealing with somebody with MPD or other cluster B dynamics, when you do something great, you can walk in the door and be like, I got an A. You could get in trouble. You could walk in that same door and say, hey, I just got sent home from school and I can't go to school for a week because of me, getting in trouble. You might be going to get pizza that night. Who knows? Do you see what I'm saying? So we don't know. You never knew what was up or down. Arnold, thank you. Keep up the good work. I'm just glad that you tuned in. Thank you for tuning in. And Arnold's actually been on the show multiple times on relationships and what have you, and really working on relationships and how to keep those relationships alive. And I appreciate him tuning in. It's interesting. The save the internet, save internet. Yeah, because the point is that we want to always be able to have the knowledge we need to see this, and having the support group and having the support here on the show, whether you're listening on USA Radio Networks or you're listening on the internet here, we need to have it. We need to connect and understand what's happening here. We can all be a source of information for one another and a source of help for one another, and I think that can be so powerful. In the process of what we're dealing with. Hey, Naz, good to see you. How's it going? Well, it's going good. We're here on the show. We're here on the show doing the show today, and it's getting good. And I think we got a little bit more left, so stay tuned. We're going to go back here onto the satellite, and then I will continue on the chat here when we take our next break on the commercials. So here we go. In the meantime, if y'all have any thoughts for upcoming shows, let me know. I'm definitely always interested in what y'all have to say, and I'm always interested in your opinions and thoughts because they are always pretty good. So, and I appreciate y'all listening. Here we go. We'll go back here for the few seconds to spare.
50% off business and first class tickets.
800-871-3291. 800-871-3291. Again, that's 800-871-3291.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Hey, we're talking about dysfunction, overlooking the dysfunction, why we overlooked it, what we do, and when we're not overlooking and we see it, right? I mean, like sometimes I've realized that I have trained myself, and obviously, when I'm working with clients, we uncover everything. We uncover everything, but sometimes when you're with some family members or you're with some friends, you don't want to see all that dysfunction. You don't want to see it. And you kind of tune it out. Even when it's right in your face. Even when it's right in your face, we tell ourselves a story. Or we say it's not that bad. Or we say, I don't know all the information and I'm not going to judge. And see, I'm really against judgment. That's something that I'm really against, because when we start judging other people all the time, it means that we're probably overlooking a problem in our own situation. Because when we start deflecting our energy on judging other people, that means that we might need to focus that energy on us. And there's probably something we don't want to look at. So I'm not big on judgment. And I know y'all aren't either. So it's hard because then you get in that gray area, right? Where you go, oh, I can see something's probably up, or at least I feel it, but I don't want to bring it up. And then maybe you just kind of say, and then the other thing is, I think all of us go back into our headspace of how we lived our life. And, you know, our lives were not perfect. So then we just sit there and say, well, my life wasn't perfect. I did some crazy stuff. It is what it is, you know, and we kind of override it from there too, right? We kind of override it from there. We go, you know, yeah, I mean, yeah, I made it through. We're going to be fine. But then there comes a time when it's like you no longer can lie to yourself that this is happening. And it kind of hits you like a ton of bricks. And that's when you kind of look at things and you go, okay, I see it for what it is. Why is this triggering me? Like we talked about right before the break. Why is it triggering me? Why do I feel like I have to say something? And that's the next step. Why do I feel like I need to say something? And the only reason that I would bring up dysfunction is if I feel as though if I bring it up, it's to help somebody better their life, or it's to save someone that's involved in their life, right? And I'm not, you know, and I get it. We're not all out there Cape Crusaders. We're not all trying to be, you know, and I know we have to be careful with that codependent tendencies too, right? We have to really understand what we're doing this for. We also have to make sure there's egos not involved either. I mean, there's a lot of due diligence. But honestly, the only reason you would bring it up is if you really wanted to help somebody. You really wanted to help somebody. Or you believe that they could take it and understand it and use that to better their life. Because you care. And let me give you an example. Because one of the things that I've realized in life is that when people don't care, what do we do when we don't care? When something's not that important to us? We just don't say anything. We just don't say anything. Somebody could create something and you just can't stand it. But instead of giving them feedback, oh yeah, it's great. It's great. Yeah, it's great. It's awesome. Thanks. We just say that because we don't want to deal with it. But it's like when you really do care about somebody and the rubber meets the road, how do you deal with that? When somebody is facing a situation and you see, and let me give you a good example because I think this example might help us to understand, you know, a little better. You know, you have a friend that you've been acting for a long time. You've been telling yourself that they don't have a drinking problem. Okay. And I know many of us have a friend like that, right? Where, you know, you occasionally go out with them. You used to go out with them a lot, but you stopped because they were always out of control. But you just was like, oh, you know, that's just them blowing off steam, you know, and you go out a couple of times and it's just nerve wracking and stressful and really embarrassing. And you're like, oh God, this is horrible. And then you start going to lunches with them because you don't want to see it. And then all of a sudden the alcohol starts coming into the lunches. And eventually at one point in time, you know, you have to see the truth. And you realize that your friend who you really care about, their life is falling apart because they become, you know, they're a full-on alcoholic and they can't control it. And you want to help them. But what do you do when you finally analyze the fact that this person, okay, so first off, are you triggered about the alcoholism? To me, I'm not triggered about it. That's not something that triggers me. And you know, sometimes maybe their actions and attitude because of the alcohol can be triggering. Like I think it can be rude or disrespectful. Or sometimes it can be triggering that they can put you in a position you don't want to be in, like calling you in the middle of the night, asking you to come pick them up. Or, you know, and you want to help friends, but it's like, dude, for my own safety, I'm in bed. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Call an Uber. Okay? But it's like, at what point do you finally bring it up? And then that's when the situation happens. How do you bring it up? And I've had to do this before, and I've had to do it recently. Because I cared about that person, because I cared about them. I didn't want them getting hurt, but I also didn't want them hurting other people, to be honest with you. Because I don't think that they really care about their life that much, so they wouldn't be doing what they're doing right now. My worry was that if I don't bring it up, what if they hurt somebody, and I knew that I could have said something, would I be just as guilty for not saying something? And that's a sucky place to be, because you're like, oh, great, now I have this moral, ethical reason that I should say something to this friend. At least say something and see if I can help them. I might not be able to change anything, but at least I can see if I can help them. At least bring it to the forefront of their knowledge base and not be acquiescent to them. Not just being, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, man, let me, woohoo, pat you on the back. Have that 15th drink that night. That's great. No. because then I'm just as bad, right? Because I'm not really caring either. And I had the discussion. I've had the discussion with people before. And sometimes that discussion goes well. And sometimes that discussion doesn't go anywhere. And sometimes that discussion goes really bad. And I found that the people, when the discussion goes really bad, they're just not ready to hear it. And sometimes when that happens, they'll cut you out. You're not going to be spoken to for a while, if ever. You might be painted black forever. And so that's why when we point out dysfunction, we have to be ready for the fact that we might not ever talk to that person again. And I know that sounds extreme, and usually that's not going to happen. But it can. It can. I had a situation where I pointed it out, and it took about 4 months for that person to reach back out to me. And that was okay with me. I was okay with that. Because I knew if they had reached out before, they'd just be lying anyway. And I also knew that, you know what, I had nothing else to say. I mean, if I kept overlooking and not dealing with it, I wasn't really much of a friend then. And I really didn't care if that's the case. And then on top of that, what is the friendship when you're just acquiescing to somebody and accepting the reality that's really not a good reality for them? I would hope that somebody would at least, out of respect for me, speak up in that situation. To me, not to other people, but to myself. And then I've had it where people say, you know what, and I say it in a very kind way, hey, I'm here as your friend. And I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't care at all. Because this is a lot of work for me, and I don't really need to be doing this on my downtime, my off days. I don't need to be trying to counsel you or help you or coach you on my downtime and my off days, which I don't have any except for Sunday. So it's like, okay, but it's like I do care about you, otherwise I wouldn't bring it up. And some people will accept it. And you always have to preface it that way. If I didn't care, if I didn't want to see the best for you, or the best for your family, or whoever's involved, I wouldn't say anything. Because it doesn't behoove me to say anything, because you can tell me, you can block me tomorrow for saying this. But I'm not going to go elsewhere. I'm not going to tell other people about it. I'm just going directly to you. And, it works sometimes. It does work sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it kind of works and it kind of doesn't. And it's kind of in that lopsided little gray area where you go, I don't really even know if I got through this person or not. And you go, you just got to let it go. Give it up to God. Do what you got to do. I hope that they find what they need to find. Seriously, that's kind of the situation. But I've also found that when people don't get it, or they don't want to hear it, or they fight you, there's a time in the fight where they might turn it around on you and say that you're the blame, or that you have problems. And that's usually a tactic, right? Is that, you have problems. There's a tactic that there's something wrong with you. And that's a great way of turning it around, right? That's a lot of people use that tactic because why? Because it works. Because all of a sudden we're no longer talking about what we were talking about. We're being talked about ourselves. And when that starts happening, hey, it's going to happen. You just got to accept that and go, okay. And my thing, don't get into an argument about it. Just say, hey, okay, that's cool. I see where we're going with this. It's not really the way I was hoping we would have this conversation, but I understand that you're not ready for this conversation, and I'm not going to push it on you, and I wish you the best of luck, and I'm going to take off, or I'm going to head out, or I'm going to get off the phone, or whatever else. Because when they start turning around on you, making you the villain and villainizing you, the reason for that is to be able to stick their head back in the sand and try to continue to do what they're doing, because they're still lying to themselves. And you can't override someone lying to themselves. If someone is lying to themselves, you can't change that. They have to stop lying to themselves before they stop lying to you. Okay, so that's it. If someone's still lying to themselves, there's nothing you can do. And what I have found, though, is that even in the times where it seems like it couldn't get worse, like the conversation was that bad, I always think that sometimes just telling somebody the truth in a positive or neutral way is profound. And then they can use that information and see if it seeps in. Basically, you've set the wake up alarm for them and see if they wake up. Maybe multiple people doing it could help. But then at that point, when that's not working, you've got to step back emotionally. Okay? Some people say, well, I'm just going to, I don't care. I'll just go along with it. Other people say, well, I'm going to block them, and and then there's a triggering point for us to get angry. They didn't listen to us. So it's like, it's not for us we can't change people. We can only help advise. And see, the thing about pointing out the dysfunction is that nobody asked you to. See, that's where the gray area is that people ask me for advice and I give it because they ask. There's a reason why people hire to work with me, because they ask me. They want me to help them figure out situations in their life that makes it work for them to the best of the ability and help them live their true life. But if somebody's not asking for my advice, that's where the gray area is because they need to live their own life. But if you care about somebody, that's where that situation is. You care about someone that's in that person's life, like a child or an animal that they should be taken care of or whatever's going on. That's when we have to say something. But again, we're saying it and it hasn't been asked for. And that's hard because you might get some blowback from that. And when you do, we have to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to emotionally distance myself from the person. I can love them from a distance. I can occasionally text message, occasionally, email or whatever, but I'm not going to be in the forefront of their life because I realize that, that's just not something I'm choosing to do right now. And see, I think that's what changes the dynamic from when we were a child to when we're an adult, is that we can choose who we interact with. We can choose the how we feel about it. We don't have to acquiesce because we have no power. Now we actually have the power to decide, do I want that around me all the time or do I not? Do I want that around me one day a week or do I not? Do I want to spend time with that person at lunch because I know that they're going to drink all the time and that's the only time that I'm going to get a sober version of them? Okay, if that's what you're willing to do. You got to think about what you're willing to deal with. Because if you're dealing with something that you're not willing to deal with and it's causing resentment and anger in the relationship, that's not helping anybody. We're going to end up taking that resentment and anger out on them eventually, and there's going to be a fight and an argument, and it's probably not going to turn out great, right? Because all that pent-up anger it doesn't go anywhere. It just festers, right? It's like, and you just lose it. And so we have to just sit there and say, okay, if you're willing to bring it up, then find out who's willing to take it. And if they're not willing to take it, then, I also find that sometimes too, we need to sit there and look at, what is this telling us? What is this telling me about my life? Is there something that I need to be looking at? Some of you, I know, that have come to me and said, there's multiple people in my life that are dealing with multiple situations and I feel bad, but there's, it's getting in the way of their development. I want to point it out. It's like, okay, let's make sure why we're pointing this out. Are we pointing this out because we're being altruistic? Are we pointing this out because we want the best for the other person? Why are we pointing this out? Also, do we need to look inside of ourselves? Is there anything that we need to be working on that directly correlates to maybe the situation? And how can I begin to work on that? Because I do agree that we have to be careful. If we're in a situation where we find ourselves around many people with many issues, we have to recognize the fact that sometimes that can be deflection used properly by us to be able to focus on their dysfunction instead of our own. But if that's not the case, and it's altruistically pointing it out, it's the right thing to do, but realize that somebody did not ask for that information, most likely. And so when we return, I'm going to be talking more about, how to step back, but also maybe some things that we can do to augment, because sometimes we can get depressed or lonely because maybe some friends that you've tried to point that out are no longer there with you. And so maybe it's time to start looking around and start seeing, maybe it's time to develop new friendships and put yourself out there and work on some things that could help. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. Don't change the channel. Don't change the channel. We still have some few minutes left. Ashley Burgess will be back this time. 2 shakes.
I hope you've enjoyed my history and lore tales here on Ashley's True Life Show.
Okie dokie, I'm back. So I got a client right after this, couple of clients today, so we'll have to cut out early. But let me know if there's anything that y'all have thought Maria, great to see you. Wonderful tonight. Good to see you. Actions do speak louder than words. Dr. Marnie. Brad, the non-aware is so easily manipulated by repetitive image and speech. Very true. Very true. Eiffel Tower, trauma-based. Yes, awareness. Ashley talks the talk and walks the walk. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Ashley, I hear you. I'm so glad that you tuned in today. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Renee, when I was a kid, let's see. When I was a kid, I had to deal with a lot of family fights. My family is the most dysfunctional family ever. And I think many of us have dealt with that, right? We've dealt with the dysfunction in the family. Many of us have. And we know what that dysfunction is like. We've been there. We've done that. We've watched it. Maria, great to have you. Good to see you today. And in that dysfunction, Renee, we know that we've seen it. We've done it. We don't want to keep living that, right? We don't want to live that when we're able to choose. Eiffel Tower, I didn't know who I was. I was shut down, and that's how I was raised. Renee, when I was a kid, I had to deal with a lot of family fights. Yeah, being the youngest, I thought my family was most dysfunctional. And it is. I mean, that's what happens when we deal with those family arguments and those fights. That's really challenging, Yes, Nas, I heard that as long as you haven't resolved your relationship with your unhealthy mother, your relationships will be impacted. Very true. If we haven't dealt with our relationships with our parent dynamic, it turns into other relationships, and we find people that have similarities. And we get gravitated to that because it seems normal, right? It seems like our normal, but it's unhealthy. Renee, I have a brother that thinks that everyone is out to get him. How do you deal with a person that is paranoid and has paranoid delusions? An idea for a show. That's a great show idea. Hey, George, write that one down if you don't mind. Awesome, Renee. I like that one. We'll write that one down. Paranoid delusions and how to deal with it. Let's see. Here we go. We're going to go back to the studio.
Agent today.
800-461-2114. 800-461-2114. That's 800-461-2114. Paid for by Senior Choice Plans.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been discussing pointing out the dysfunction, when to do it, when not to do it, why you do it, and what happens when somebody accepts it or rejects it. I mean, it's a big deal, and we're dealing with it on a constant basis. If you know anybody in life, we all have dysfunction in our life to some degree, and mostly everybody in our lives have dysfunction in their life. But it's like when dysfunction gets to a certain level, do we point it out? And right before the break, I was talking about, pointing it out and when people accept it or reject it. And when people reject it, we have to get some emotional distance. You can only help somebody so much, especially when they're not asking for it. But also we have to separate that and say, okay, what am I learning from this process? What am I supposed to learn from what I just experienced? What am I supposed to learn from the situation that I'm dealing with? Because I realized dysfunction is dysfunction, but it's not just dysfunction. When we deal with dysfunction, yes, it's dysfunction, but when we deal with it, there's a reason why it's in our life. And some of you might have consistent dysfunction of the same type of caliber of dysfunction. And you go, why? Why is it that every time if I walk into a room, I'm every single narcissist, every single thing, every single person's going to come my way. Why? It's crazy. Well, it's because we are connected to that. It's because we're connected to that. It's because we're used to that. It's because that's our norm. And we have to be able to understand that we have to change that norm and get out of that normalcy. And when we do that, we're able to override those situations, right? But we have to see, why is that? Why do we bring that type of dysfunction to us? Why is that? Because sometimes we sit there and we get down on ourselves, we get angry, we get upset with ourselves, we get judgmental. But why do we do that? Why do we self-sabotage ourselves? We got to just look at the core reason for why something happens instead of that. Why do we judge? When we judge ourselves, we're deflecting again. When we judge ourselves, we get confused. When we judge, we get confused. We get confused on why we're doing what we're doing. we get confused and we don't take the right direction. We don't take the right path because we have derailed ourselves with what we need to be doing, right? And so it's like, okay, when we see dysfunction, does it impact me? Do I need to make a comment? Can I stay quiet? Do I need to put some separation between me and that person? Or do I want to say something because I believe that I need to say something? All these things are important. And, to me, too, is that when it happens, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is that in the heat of the moment, don't say anything. In the heat of the moment, if you can sleep on something before you respond to something, you have a much better chance of doing the right thing. And I've realized that a lot of times we feel like we have to do something now. I got to do it now. I got to do it yesterday. Well, you know what? You could have done it for the last 3 years. You didn't do it. Why do we have to do it yesterday? It's better to just kind of let it go. Think about it. Understand the situation, process it. And as we process it, we will choose the right path and the right path. But we have to remember, if we're going back to the same programming, not changing anything, why are we avoiding it? If we're just basically in denial, why are we in denial? Because a lot of times that denial is a safe place to be because we don't want to make any changes. We're not ready to make any changes. And I've realized that throughout our lives, we have to be willing to distance ourselves from some people. Throughout our lives, we have to be willing to look at our values and stand up for our values. Throughout our lives, we have to be willing to clean house when it comes to certain people we hang out with, because we have to do what we need to do to keep our identity based on our values, creating those healthy boundaries. And if somebody can't respect those boundaries, that's fine. But we're not going to disrespect ourselves in the process of just acquiescing just so that we can have somebody around us, right? Because that's like we're just there because we want somebody around us. It's out of fear of not having someone there that we keep someone around us that's not to our best and highest good for all concerned, right? Because there's resentment on all sides. And that's just what I'm pointing out. So I hope that this show has helped. And in the process, the dysfunction is a function. Figure it out. Look at the dysfunction. Does it trigger me? Do I need to point it out? Is it something that I can express? Is it something that I need to distance myself from? Is this even worth me bringing up? Does this even bother me? Or is this something I'm looking at and deflecting from? Share this if you can with your family and friends. Check out YouTube. Go to YouTube. Put in Ashley Berges. Ashley Berges. We have new video content up every single week. New video content coming up this coming week as well. And thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to contact me, go to ashleyberges.com, ashleyberges.com. Click on that contact page. Send me an email. I will respond ASAP. So have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing you next week. And in the meantime, don't forget to live your true life. Live your true life perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Berges, will be back in. I'll be back this time. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.
It is interesting to see how the subjects on Ashley's True Life show and current events so often correlate with past events. As Ashley says,
thank you, Chris. We appreciate you. Okay, I'm turning off the Lucy Live satellite uplink. I have a client here in the next minute, but I just wanted to say thank you all for tuning in. Be your own best friend, Gloria. I love that. Eiffel Tower, I love these comments. Thank you, Eiffel Tower. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you so much. The dysfunction, the intuition, listening to your gut, stand tall for sure. And that's all amazing because we got to start looking at that. Where are we not being ourselves? Where are we not standing tall? Where are we shrinking? Where are we acting like we're not valuable? Why are we doing that? Why do we shrink? Why do we hide our value? Why do we hide ourselves? Gloria, thank you for tuning in. Let's see here. Renee, thank you for tuning in. Naj, thank you for tuning in. Maria, great to see you. And everybody that's tuning in, thank you so much for tuning in today. Brenda, Marnie, it's a great show. Let me know if you have any thoughts on some concepts for a show. Eiffel Tower, you are welcome for sure. Merci from Paris. Merci from Paris. We have a show, I believe, live on Saturday next week. So we'll be around, and that'll be the show before Thanksgiving. Let me know, Renee. I liked your concept of the paranoia and how to deal with someone that's paranoid. That's definitely something we can talk about. And all is good. So let's rock and roll from there. And any thoughts? And Dr. Marnie, I will be talking to you later on this afternoon or evening after work. And let's rock and roll. Let me know what y'all are thinking about, because we got some other good videos coming up on YouTube that we're putting up. The membership side on the website is getting closer and closer to finalization. We still have some more work. It's a lot to take on, but we're doing it. All in all, we got some good stuff coming out. So we'll have some video coming out next week. And let me know, because Renee, I think that's a great one. Paranoia is something that we have to understand how to work on, and how do we communicate with somebody that's dealing with that, because it's really, really challenging. Because definitely there's ways of communication, and definitely ways that are not going to work. So thank y'all so much. Have a great weekend. In the meantime, don't forget to live your true life. And we just appreciate y'all tuning in. Buddy's over here on the couch sleeping right now. George is hanging out, working on the membership site, actually, as we speak. So, yeah, thanks so much for everything. And we will be back on next Saturday. And we'll be here for our pre-Thanksgiving week show. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And let me know if y'all do want to communicate with me or connect with me. Just go to ashleyburgess.com, click on that contact page, and send me an email, and I'll respond back ASAP. Much care, much love. Y'all have a good one. Bye, guys.